with the Comet Media Foundation, and it has the full financial support of the Jamnalal Bajaj Foundation of the Bajaj Trust. Over the last 4 weeks, we brought together for collective viewing 121 video work by 79 video practitioners from all across India. And I want to once again acknowledge the warm participation and support of all the artists who came together to make this festival a reality, even if it was on an online platform. The festival was titled Fields of Vision, and it brought together a diversity of experiments and content in the moving image form, one that has been widely acknowledged and appreciated. The range of discussion and reportage around these works and the curatorial can be accessed from our website, VAICA.org. Uh, just kind of recounting the way in which the whole festival was structured, we had 121 works which were distributed under weekly thematic of cartographies of sensation, which clubbed broadly works that were around artist practices, ideas of science and scientific explorations, and experiments in video work, the form itself. The second week was about orbits of desire, which in which we had work around body, desire, relationships, sexuality, and so on. In the third week, we had videos themed around peripheries of the real, and these videos were primarily kind of exploring the margins of the hyper real, para real, virtual, and such other forms of reality that we that can be now explored in the digital space. They also had a lot of work done around the theme of the pandemic, which was also a new kind of reality that we were suspended in for the last 2 years. And finally, today, this week, we are meeting for the final discussion of urban heterotopias. And the videos in this set of urban heterotopias create their own psychogeographies within the shared domain of the city. Also, the city is the most charged site for the performance of politics. It is the ground where multiple ideologies collide, intertwine, and dance with each other. So I'll not go into much detail of the weekly thematic. I will hand over, or rather invite Bharti Kapadia, who will introduce our panelists today and open up the ideas around the theme through their discussion. So Bharti, over to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So welcome all of you to the fourth and the final panel discussion of VAICA 2 Festival. I welcome all of you warmly, and I will give a brief introduction to all our panelists. We have 4 panelists today, 3 of them artist panelists. One is Amitesh Grover, then Babu Eshwar Prasad, I'm so sorry, Sheba Chhachhi, and the 4th panelist is Sarover Zaidi, who will be moderating the discussion. Amitesh Grover is an award-winning interdisciplinary theatre artist based in New Delhi. His practice is anchored in the art and politics of performance, and he moves beyond theatre into installation. He also is involved with film, digital, and text-based art. Amitesh's work engages with themes like absence-presence, the necessity of remembering, of enacting resistance, and the embodiment of forms of knowledge that cannot be expressed in words. Amitesh is the recipient of several international grants and artist residencies, and his work is shown internationally in theaters, galleries, public spaces, and on the internet. He also teaches theater and curates programs for performance artists. Our second panelist, Babu Eshwar Prasad, graduated in painting from Karnataka Chitrakala Parishad, Bangalore. He has an MFA in printmaking from the Faculty of Fine Arts, MS University, Vadodara. Over the years, he has sustained a deep interest in exploring certain media like sculpture, sound, photography, video, and film. In 2014, Babu made his first feature film, Gali Beach, which means wind seed, which was screened at the Mumbai Academy of the Moving Image Festival, Bengaluru International Film Festival, Third San Francisco South Asian Film Festival, and Film Columbia Festival. He has recently completed his second feature film, Hariva Nadige Mahiyella Kalu. What do you think, Babu? Is it correctly pronounced?
It's Hariva Nandige Mayella Kalu.
Thank you. Which means a running river is all legs. Nice title.
Thank you.
Sheba Chhachhi, our third artist panelist, is an installation artist and photographer who investigates questions of gender, eco-philosophy, violence, and visual cultures. An activist who documented the women's movement in the 80s, Sheba moved on to create intimate sensorial encounters through large multimedia installations. She has exhibited internationally, and her works are in significant public and private collections, including the Tate Modern UK, Kiran Nadar Museum, Delhi, Bose Parsia, New York, Singapore Art Museum, Devi Art Foundation, Delhi, and National Gallery of Modern Art, India. I must say that her work seeks to bring the contemplative into the political. It's an important point. Sarover Zaidi, who will be moderating today's discussion, is a philosopher and a social anthropologist. She works at the intersections of critical theory, anthropology, art, architecture, and material culture studies. She has worked extensively on religious architecture and urbanism in the city of Mumbai, and currently co-runs a website on writing the city called Chirag Delhi. Previously, she has worked on rural development with a focus on health, education, and women's rights across India, and is currently working on religious iconography and modernist architecture in South Asia. She is a recipient of the Max Planck Fellowship, the Intact Fellowship, the IFA Fellowship, and the Coach Fellowship awarded to her for her research projects. Besides this, she also curates an interdisciplinary forum on art, architecture, and anthropology called Elementary Forms, and has previously taught at the School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi. She currently teaches at the Jindal School of Art and Architecture, Sonipat, India. All the best for today's discussion. Over to you, Sarover.
Thank you, Bharti, and thank you for introducing us all. So I wanted to the title of this section that we going into is urban, based on urban heterotopias. And heterotopia is actually a term that moves from, in a sense, from the academy to the spaces of art, urban studies, and it takes on many forms, also feminist studies. And I think just for the point of a lot of, because we are all coming from different disciplines, and in fact, few people who have sent the invite to ask me what does heterotopia even mean. I wanted to give a brief introduction on the idea of heterotopia before I open it out and we have our discussion. So heterotopia was, of course, a term coined by Foucault, who's a critical theorist, and Foucault wanted to think of an idea of a space which is beyond institutional spaces, and he kind of wanted to move out of the purely formed spaces, which could also include something like utopia and dystopia. So heterotopia was a deviated space, and it was also a space which could be juxtaposing many things that were happening inside it, and it could be heterotopias eventually could be any and every space, but the way they were originally conceptualized, they were supposed to be outside formal institutional spaces in that sense. So streets, street corners, to, women's spaces, all became part of this notion of heterotopias. Of course, later work on heterotopia was done by geographers like Edward Soja and even David Harvey, who introduced the idea of class differences as part of the creation of heterotopias. And so cities where the upper classes and the lower classes live in the same place, the lower class creates its own heterotopia. And it's a concept which today we've seen, at least in India, through protest spaces like highways, where like the Shaheen Bagh protest was held on a highway, and also was the farmers' protest. So something that was part of, in a sense, of a main institutional frame of a city became a heterotopia by the forms of action that inhabited it. I think with the panelists today, we have very different forms of entering the idea of heterotopia. So Sheba's work, I think, is something that encounters the feminist history, and it also moves to the feminine body as a heterotopia. While Babu, I think for Babu's work, it's located on, and I'm not saying specifically this work, it could connect to his other work too. Babu's work is something that works with the space of the camera and the cinematic as a heterotopia. So the film space itself becomes a heterotopia. While Amitesh looks at spaces of film and theater conjoining to generate an idea of the heterotopia itself. So here, I think what will be interesting in this discussion to open out is the medium as a heterotopia and the content also. So is the idea of the moving image space, the cinematic space itself a form of the heterotopia, and then it pulls it to different forms and locations of how you kind of connect to the idea. Would you like to respond, Sheba, Amitesh, anyone? Sorry, who's going first?
Well, I'll give it a shot. I think that one needs to sort of pass the idea of the moving image itself, because the moving image is at the surface of many institutions, many ideologies, which would not be what I would consider heterotopic. So I think it is like the highway, which was inhabited by certain kinds of actions, turned into heterotopia. It is how you inhabit the medium that could possibly present the possibility of heterotopia. But I think if one takes the pure idea of heterotopia, the very production and dissemination of the moving image medium relies on certain institutional infrastructure. Just as our discussion today relies on certain institutional, highly controlled corporate infrastructure. So I don't think one can ever quite forget that. So for me, the idea of heterotopia is perhaps it's more interesting to look at how the gestures, the sensations, the kinds of ideas that are explored within this space challenge and subvert the institutional frame, because the institutional frame never really goes away.
Yeah. What was very interesting that I felt in your work, it resonated, of course, with your earlier photographic documentation of the feminist movements, is where the body itself becomes the third space, or the feminine body itself is the third space. So as the body is traversing the city, it is generating a space for itself, which in a sense all the time women have to do.
Yes, I mean,
there's always a calibration of the feminine body in a public space, and that is, I mean, there is a lot of actually work that done by feminist scholars on this, but to see it in this form was extremely, I mean, it was very compelling. And I think as the feminine body moves through the city space, it creates for itself space, and it negotiates space, right?
Yes.
Um,
And in a way, by relating to these spaces in a manner which is not everyday, each space is transformed.
yeah.
Each particular location is changed by the woman's actions and by the way she inhabits that space, because she inhabits it in a way which challenges the everyday inhabitation, which you see alongside, sometimes not. I think also this idea, I like very much what you're saying about her body becoming the heterotopic space. I think it's also for me to do with while every woman is well aware of the continuous negotiation of the gendered spaces of the city, there is something in this body and the way it moves, at least this is what I wish to develop, that is somewhere also saying, I'm not sure I'm willing to make those old negotiations anymore. I'm moving differently. I'm claiming this space differently. So for me, there's also generational difference in terms of the kind of body and the kind of woman that is inhabiting the space and transforming it is through her inhabitation. Of course, there are huge tensions and there's challenges and kind of, these are sites which become suddenly for a moment contested, but she moves on. And so it is also about new forms of bringing your own body into these spaces.
And I think there is a sense of, sorry, we're going directly into Sheba's work, but
I was hoping this wouldn't happen, actually.
No, I will. They will have to answer all the other questions also. So,
yeah.
But I think it's. I think the idea of the ordinary and the everyday negotiation of the feminine body, and it's then it trying to create and break thresholds is what also that kind of comes through in your work. And I think that is also that comes through in the body of your work, whether it was photographing women performing a street play in the 80s, or it was always about the negotiation of navigating the set threshold to generate that feminine space in the middle of a street, in the middle of a slum, etc. So I think that's a very, very interesting point. And I think the body as heterotopia is something that I really felt strongly in your work, where it generates as it walks, or as it does anything, and it folds back into the everyday life of women.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so
I'd be curious if Babu or Amitesh would like to, since we've started discussing this, if they'd like to comment on this work. I don't know if I'm stepping out of line, but that would be nice, and then we could move to other works.
I just thought I'll respond to Sarover's provocation around the heterotopia. Because it is something that it is an idea that has fascinated all of us for quite some time. One way to understand heterotopia is to understand a sort of a space that's out of place. It's somehow not supposed to be there, or that it sort of intervenes into other normative spaces. So, Foucault gives this example of a cemetery, or even a garden as a heterotopic space. And that's really interesting because both cemeteries and gardens are a site of death and remembrance, and the other a site of nurture and life, both somehow don't belong to the city space. Both are not part of the urban space as it has been imagined, especially in the 20th century. And so to sort of imagine other kinds of spaces, also not as singular but as collective spaces. I mean, both the cemetery and the garden are actually collective spaces as well. They're inhabited by a multitude of memories of people, also of plants, and this collectivity that produces a space that becomes heterotopic for an urban environment is something that I think it's worth dwelling on today, because, for example, I live in the city of Delhi, where it has become extremely urgent to think about the relationship that these heterotopic spaces have with the center of power, and how that power center is, by this I don't mean the political power center, but also the the financial power center, and how these centers of power are defining and structuring and building the city around us, and how these heterotopic places are intervening and disrupting in them. And I think the production of the city of Delhi, if one were to look at the map, the production of it is the tension that ensues between these heterotopic spaces and these sort of centers of power. And therein lies our new heterotopia in our city.
Babu, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, as you were mentioning, Scheinberg and form of protest on the road, and even my videos, it's a kind of a moving thing. And even in this pandemic time, we have seen how this body was moving, and people were moving, and so many things was happening on the street. Also, kind of when you're moving, you're not belongs to that particular area. There's a space, it's keep moving. So this is a kind of how they even farmers have taken over the toll, and and this road is also become like a, if you travel 10 kilometers every 10 kilometer, you will get a toll, and then you have to pay and pass it. So the space has become a very this speed and politics and so many as Amitesh mentioned in the city that all the spaces and juxtaposing thing, and also same time this highway when you were traveling. So I visited while shooting in the village and all. There is you don't see any. You see only kids and older people. So they are all moved to the city. So this kind of spaces are more interested because of I'm more interested in the landscape kind of aspects. So this is the.
Yeah, what was interesting in thinking about highways, and when I was looking at your work, was that the way the camera was moving and the road was moving, and you done this effect of holding the kind of frame in a certain way, and the gaze, and there was some still points, but there was a lot of continuum and movement, and it was interesting to then think of what are the forms and locations of the heterotopia that are happening in your work. Is it the camera? Is it the gaze? Is it the film itself? Is it the highway? Is it all of it kind of together?
It's all of it together. See, this is what we say. It is we see through the lens, and then we say moving images. So there is no moving actually. So I'm also interested in more in not just technical. It's a philosophical way of thinking about the moving images itself. See, what you see is like, when, you see 24 frames per second, which is completely still. There is no movement at all. So there's, in the movie itself is there is no moving thing. So you see only per second 24 frames is changing. Between changes there is a gap. So you imagine the movement inside your brain. So, and then I'm showing the road and moving together with this kind of stills, and also seeing in a different kind of lenses. This, how this road surveyor use the lens is different, or some biker, if biker is carrying a GoPro, there is then another kind of camera is there, and I am looking at a camera, I am looking through a camera. So these are all part of it. It is a, because I made a film, the first feature film was, no, let me talk about this footage, because this footage was shot 15 years ago in a mini DV camera. So mini DV is a tape, even though it's a digital, it was recording on tape. So then I just did a week-long road trip and just carried this camera, and I never thought I will use it one day, because it is just shot in a handheld and this thing. But after 10 years, I went back to the same road for my feature film, and I not use any of this footage from the footage, but same time I used the similar same time. It was a monsoon time when I was traveled in that 15 years back, so that I noticed how these clouds are moving, how the space in the open space, how you see the light changes and all this. And also this road is also become a part of the, I mean, for each person it will be different. For a farmer, road may be a threat. For a road engineer, it may be a very development. So for a girl, somebody going in a bike, so she feels a very liberated kind of space in the riding. So, and these are, I was looking at a different kind of how this road is related to each person or something like that. So, and then after making that movie, I started interested in the sound. Then I started making the sound, and then I made a independent sound piece from the movie itself, taken from all the highway sounds and all this. So it was 9.5 minutes sound. And then after making the sound, then I felt that I should go back and see the footage. So it's like completely circular kind of thing. It came finally. So then I was also in the pandemic sitting in between the four walls and not able to move the way we were moving earlier. So suddenly I thought, okay, let me see this footage. So, and also like transferred from the tape to the digital again, and then watching this, and I had a lot of this and each time when you look at the thing, the landscape is completely changed. And even the road is not the road which I traveled in this particular video. So, and after 10 years, when I went for the first film shoot, the road was completely changed. Even you can't cross the highway from this part to the other part. So, after that, now if you are traveling again, it's completely different. Now you need a fast track to cross. So, it is not easy to go through the tolls. It's all very complicated things I could see. And
what would be very interesting, Babu, if you could comment on it, is the notion of the highway and its relationship to speed. And also the idea that the highway is and of course speed and its relationship to the form of the film. Because when you are doing a staccato in the format that you use of stills to create the film, it completely changes the form of the highway. The other thing that I find interesting vis-a-vis highways, and I'm going to link this a little bit to this whole heterotopia concept, is, and on one side, highways are a network of institutions in a sense, right? There's like a whole kind of a system of maps and how highways are imagined as a part of the nation, etc. On the other hand, highways have many forms of life. on them, in them, on the side of them. And there's also, I remember a play by Habib Tanvir called Sadak. I don't know if Amitesh knows of it. I saw it like really long ago. I was 18 years old or something. And that play was about the anxiety of the coming of a road to a village. And so in a sense, your work in this worked to the camera was slowing the speed of the highway for us, right? Because you use stills, yet it had a certain movement and a speed again. I mean, would you like to comment a bit on that? Like how does one actually represent something like the highway as a heterotopia, or as a American highways are seen as dystopic. They're just vast and limitless, and that's how they are seen. Urban planners will always see them like that.
The speed is another thing, is that even when I shot this video in handheld, the vehicle was going very fast actually. So when you see from the front, you can't make out from the camera that speed is there. So, but when you show it from the side, and then you move it, it's very you can see the blur of the image. So the motion blur, what they say. But of course, now our road is also a very dystopian kind of thing. That's completely taken over, and also I am more interested in that kind of showing the iris kind of thing, or what you call circular vignette or something, and the flickering thing and all this. So same time when you're moving, this wiper is because of the rain. So it's all like, I'm thinking in very cinematic way also. So
Yes.
definitely the road is something which is very, very, because you don't know whether I'm moving from one city to another, reaching, or I'm leaving the city. It is another kind of, and also they say that when you're in moving, you don't actually belong to any of that place.
Yeah. I want to connect back to Amitesh. Amitesh, because we were discussing forms, and I think it'll be interesting to get your sense of the work that you create in this form as a heterotopia in itself, and how do you think of forms of the theatrical and its relationship to the film as the generation of a third space, if at all, that is.
So I shot this film as part of a durational performance project that was unfolding. This was a 6 months long performance project in occupational realism, where I, along with my then collaborator Anika Aldag, we embedded ourselves as workers in an IT company, and I went to sort of work every day, and I sort of dressed like an IT company worker, and there was a contract with the HR department of the company, and my intention was to go and learn this new form of work that has defined India in the last 20-30 years, and certainly defined my generation, where millions and millions of people have actually become IT workers, software engineers, and define themselves as this new technocratic class that has now characterizes much of Indian middle class. So I sort of proposed this art project as a performance piece, but the idea was to actually go and learn work and find moments and spaces within this spellbinding space of digital capital to be able to produce disruptions and to subvert the logic of labor in some senses. And the digital capital today is its own heterotopic space. It disrupts for example, it has disrupted the socialist imaginary of the country. It has it now defines aspiration, desire, ambition for an entire class of people, and it functions no less than the kind of foundations on which we think about nations. So it has its own, for example, it employs over millions of people. The company that I was embedded in as a performer / worker, it employs 500,000 people. And this specific sort of work campus that I went to, that work campus itself had 25,000 people working there. So we're talking huge numbers. We are talking a reality which is always behind, glass walls and glass buildings, and very little is visible to us on the outside of it. And the space sort of functions with its own expectations, with its own protocols. It is a highly surveilled space with thousands of cameras and machines that beep in bodies and beep out bodies, and produce data on the working body, in hundreds of GBs of files every day. So this film actually is based in one such space. And the protagonists that you see in this space are real life employees. They are not actors, and they are induction day experts. They are the ones who meet new recruits on their first day of coming to the company to work, and they present the dream that this company is, and how this company is, and how life within this kind of a digital capital space would completely transform their identities and their lives. And they engage in attention techniques and all kinds of profiling, personality profiling techniques. They are the human version of, I think, what many algorithms today are being trained to do, which is to profile people and put us into different categories of personalities depending on how we buy, what we consume, what we click on our screens. And so they perform these techniques for the camera, right? So the film is, what I wanted to do is to highlight this new regime of labor and body in this film. And how I think, because I come from performance and theater, for me, the relationship between the camera and the body, I think of it differently. I don't think of it like how people who are trained in cinema think of it, where they think of the camera as the invisible object, as the accidental object. So, when they shoot, people are not supposed to look at the camera. And for me, I think the relationship between the camera and the body is different, in the sense that I want the camera to be very visible. I want the camera to be seen as a perspective producing machine, which can produce errors. It can produce prejudice. It can produce a power equations which which can be questioned and critiqued. And so you find in the film that many times these real life employees, they're looking at the camera and talking, and the camera is moving around them, and there are these choreographies of scenes in which it is they don't follow the logic of the cinema shoot, the way it's imagined in film. And I think that for me began to produce a kind of a visual which highlighted the absurdity of the extremely purposeful digital capital space we were in. And the camera and this relationship and the choreographies began to puncture that somehow. So not just the fact that, the final film that we saw is what is the result of that, but also the process by which we shot is also part of the film, in a sense. And I think that for me, sort of, produces a third space, like you mentioned, this sort of the idea that the equipment and the ways in which a film is made also becomes visible within the film. For me, then produces a third space. I don't know if that's coming because I come from performance and theater, and that's why it happens. But that's what I'm interested in when making a film.
Now that you mentioned the backstory to this film, also this fact that you were part of this larger project on occupational realism. Oh my God, that's like my whole life. But it's very interesting, and so it's like a fold inside a fold inside a fold, and then even your actors, how they performed was like as if they're actually on a stage. You said they're not rather than for a camera. In a sense, they had that kind of effect, right? And there is, in fact, this is also part of the critique of Foucault, which says that he posited a purity of spaces to create the idea of a third space. Okay, while each space in itself can be then read in a, I would say, Deleuzian sense, which is through these roll of folds. And then what is the real, what is the periphery, what is the third space, what is not? And I think, I mean, now the video is making a different kind of sense to me because you've told me this thing. And this notion of realism and representation becomes very different, especially because the video or the the image, the video film, then is one more location of that fold. Is what I start seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so the way I shot the film was that we rehearsed it a lot. Just like actually we would do for a performance of a theater, we rehearsed it a lot. And it was through rehearsal that the sort of a storyboard or a sort of a sequence emerged. And the protagonists, the people who perform are the dramaturgs of the film as well. They kept proposing newer and newer dramaturgy for what is it that they would like to offer to the camera being on stage. And so they were quite in charge of what they would like to perform for the camera. And in that way, I think for me, performativity gets heightened when the body and the performer takes charge in front of the camera. And I think in some senses, I think what my piece is in some way, perhaps on the other end of the spectrum, as opposed to Sheba's work, where the camera is always following or framing the body, the performer or the walker on the street, and the camera follows. And what's interesting, in Sheba's work is that there are these moments, and I was looking at it very closely, there were these moments where passers-by or the public on the street would look at the performer and then look into the camera. And what was interesting was that Sheba actually kept it. She kept this gaze that would switch between the camera, and it was almost as if that the people were looking at us, watching this film, watching the people, and watching, and also tailing the performer. And I think in that some sense I share that the breaking of the illusion to reveal an absurdity that would otherwise perhaps not get teased out.
Thanks, Amitesh. I'm going to also just tell the audience, if they have questions, they can type them out in the chat section. But one of the things that I wanted to, I don't know, it's a provocation or a conclusion, but I want to ask a kind of a question. Is heterotopia then, is it a time? Is it space? Is it a body? Is it a language? Languages create a lot of heterotopias. Is it silence, a film, a photograph, or a Zoom panel? So that is something that I was really thinking about through this thing. If anybody wants to respond, any of the panelists, audience, Anuj, Bharti, anyone, please go ahead.
I'd like to pick up on this thing that came up earlier about dystopia, heterotopia. And I've actually watched I think all the films that were in this week's festival. And I was struck by this very, this kind of slippage between the two that continuously happens. I'm not speaking directly to your provocation, but I think in a sort of tangential way, this connects. So this for me was curious because in this whole mapping of the urban and the politics of the urban and the politics enacted within the urban that most of the videos actually address, there was a kind of almost familiar reiteration of the dystopic, including that rather charming little flyover as in Outspeak. That was, I don't know if you saw that, but it's a little video on the flyover being presented through a tour guide as a kind of sensual sculptural object. Quite nicely done. But in all of this, for me, what I was troubled by was that I didn't think that any of us actually really constituted a heterotopia. And this is something that I'm mulling over. So then, of course, so what would and what do I think does, etc. But for me, because of a kind of investment in the real, that is also a kind of extension of the documentary tradition. And if we look at the formal aspects of all this work, it's actually, for me, very, it really draws much more from the documentary tradition in India, which we have a rich and really wonderful, vigorous tradition. And it is on the edge of what is classically understood as video art globally. So it's actually far more of the documentary kind. And that kind of investment in the real then makes this, the destabilizing quality that should happen when you encounter the heterotopia doesn't quite happen.
So it's very interesting that you said this, because I was thinking of my own work as an anthropologist. And the first time I ever kind of got heterotopia in a technical, structural, spatial sense was in a shrine in Bombay and in the Angan, where women used to just come and sit before they took the trains from VT. It's a shrine next to VT. And it was a location that was generated by them. It was an old shrine, but this creating a shrine space into a women's space, and the shrine as a angan. And in a sense, the reason I used to land up going to a lot of shrines, I mean, not only because I was working on them, is because I used to be tired of the street space, and those spaces gave me that space, a place for rest, and they were safer. They functioned like a third space to the congestion of the city and the chaos of the city space where I was always navigating. And it's I think the other tension that happens in this concept is that, and this happens with geographers and urban sociologists, others, is that where is actually heterotopia? You know, this is a major anxiety. Should we link it in this kind of technical sense of reading the world? Because even if you think of an asylum or the complete institutional space, there will always be corners to it. There will always be a chai ka place. There will always be places that will, in a sense, there's a word that once Rux had written about called seepage. And I think this notion of seepage works really interestingly when you actually land up either looking at the films. So is the institutional seeping into the heterotopic and vice versa? Where is it kind of holding itself? And I don't know, maybe these places do not actually exist, but they exist in this
or perhaps they exist momentarily. Like for me, the traffic island, the traffic
time
island
is also a very interesting part of this, I think.
Like in the midst of traffic, the traffic island for me becomes a heterotopic space, but very briefly. Whether it is occupied by people actually living there, there are certain traffic islands where people live or hanging out, or in this kind of arbitrary insertion that I make in the film, it can be heterotopic, but for that time only.
Yeah.
And then as time shifts, the heterotopia shifts. So I would connect this with what Amitesh was saying, which is about these kind of layers that are getting built into just the fabric of Delhi. And I think time becomes very important, because one of the things that is so particularly exciting about Delhi still is the layers of time that you find within a 1 kilometer walk. You'll find layers of time. And do these time differences then contribute to that constitution of what we would call heterotopic? Or is it all basically seeping one into the other? And it's these seconds or fragments of time that constitute heterotopic moments rather than heterotopic fixed in time spaces.
Yeah, and I mean, this Delhi thing is very interesting because, this like but then one starts thinking of something like the Central Vista, right? And its construction and fixity, right? And what will it do to heterotopic time that existed in and around India Gate and Rashtrapati Bhavan? It's going to change that. It's going to change the forms of the republic that is going to be, or people that are going to be part of it or access it or use it. And from, like people who grew up, of course, in Delhi, India Gate, and it's already changed. The ice cream guys have gone and things have, and then now people from all over India come there to see it. And what will it allow for this kind of heterotopic seepage that, in a sense, places in Delhi did? And I mean, it's already happening in monumental spaces, where some spaces have become ticketed and Lodi Gardens is still free. So I think there is still a sense to understand the notion of the complete institutional space and how it then contests and contains heterotopic spaces and ideas or time.
The key is time, because space, at the moment, space is increasingly owned either privately or by the state or in some form or the other. Space is now, in a sense, lost its radical potential. It is only time inserted into space that can create some kind of possibility for a time. Like this is
So
like,
so while I was shooting the film, I mean, we used to talk a lot with the people who were part of the film, and I once asked them if there was any space within the company campus that was not surveilled, where the CCTV cameras would not um, would not focus. And then they put me in touch with actually a worker who had made a list of tiles on certain floors where no CCTV camera was pointing at. And it was, and he had done it as a hobby, as something that he would do when he was not working in front of his laptop. And it reminded me of, again, how radical are moments of leisure within, say, the production of labor. And to my family, for example, the lawns of India Gate were exactly that. There were these spaces of leisure. There were these familial spaces where families met because there was no other place for them to gather at and meet. And that sense of sort of leisure, that claim to space as leisure, and that claim to space as an opportunity to collect, to gather, is something that is now facing the biggest threat in Delhi, with places of protests that are marked, that we need permission for to be able to access, and also in terms of places of leisure, like we were talking about Lodi Gardens, for example. And I think that the giving up of these spaces, more and more, like Sheba is saying, for example, the digital capital industries have privatized so much of public land, especially in Noida and Greater Noida, that it has become impossible to look at these townships and these cities as spaces that belong to people. They don't belong to people anymore. They belong to private capital. They belong to sort of a very small group of people. And I think we need to think about heterotopic disruptions that somehow keep creating these moments either in time or in space. And I think of the Bharat Band, for example, as this wonderful, ephemeral, heterotopic parade that takes place on Delhi streets, where everything comes to a standstill, and there is just the celebration of a union and an entire sort of family that's there. And I think the heterotopia, although Foucault imagines it as immobile spaces, I think we shouldn't imagine it as mobile spaces as well.
Yeah.
If I may, I have a childhood memory of what we call the dancing traffic policeman just at Rashtrapati Bhavan. And he would direct traffic doing kind of Bharatanatyam movements. So heterotopia within the body, 50 years ago. So yeah, so
imagine
came into like remembering that. I mean, I lived in Raksha Bhavan right next to India Gate, and we used to cycle, and the policeman would actually stop traffic for us, and then we'd cycle down the hill going wee on our bikes like 10, 11-year-olds. So it's with great grief that I watch what is happening.
Imagine if you had to do your project at Rashtrapati Bhavan today. Like I went during the Central Vista construction to take, I went because I was working on this idea, and then I started taking pictures. So so now there's this rule that you can't take photographs there, right? It is the more institutionalized authority becomes, the more anxiety it has. So otherwise it's under surveillance, but then you can't take a picture of it. So it has this strange kind of bipolarity to its existence. And even big constructions that happen across the city, they have these covers they put, like they don't want you to see what is being constructed. Like one day you'll see it. Anuj is, as an architect, is like, she's going to start lambasting architects soon. But this thing of this secretness of the state and the institutional space to be not looked at by everybody. I mean, I was, when I was taking pictures at the Central Vista in construction in May, I mean, policemen came after me. But so this, what was this anxiety of unlooking? And imagine, Sheba, if you do that, your project of just even going for a walk in that area right now and try and take a set of images or videos, it will not be possible. So I don't know what that is going to be. Is it a heterotopic hell? I mean, I don't know. It's according to architecture world, it is utopia, of course. The perfect world with the perfect citizen and the perfect land and the perfect leader. Since this is on YouTube, I will not continue. Yes, Anuj, are there any questions? Sorry, participants, Anuj.
Yeah, while probably audiences are putting their questions, I just wanted to respond that, I felt that over the discussion there is a tendency of looking at settlement for heterotopia, but I don't think even Foucault would have wanted that, and I think given that he was inhabiting a body which was homosexual, and that the idea of home was never settled in his mind, and therefore this idea of interstitial spaces where he would live interstitially or temporarily, like Sheba very rightly said. I think the idea of heterotopia, it might not be productive to kind of come to a definition of heterotopia which is settled. And I think the unsettlement of it is the charm of heterotopic space. In that sense, it reminds me of two kind of motifs. One, from your own work, and if I may extend the idea of the horizon, which is kind of there and yet not there. And the other is the idea of ruin, which also came in this presentation, that it remains incomplete and yet allows itself to be completed by your presence and inhabitation. So I think in that sense, Delhi's landscape is quite heterotopic, and that's the charm of it. And it remains so in its incompleteness. So I think the idea of settlement and its tension with a heterotopic space could be investigated further more deeply. And how does settlement happen in the mind?
No, Anuj is not trying to settle heterotopia at all. That is not my intention. But yeah, because it is something that also is compelling in this set of videos that were put together. And because it has such a huge range, that the forms and fixities of it are difficult. And I think that was the intention too, because the kind of videos you picked had that sensibility to them. I think we should open the panel for questions, or any questions, people? Hello, humans, invisible beings of. There are no questions. Oh man, I should have invited all my students. They would non-stop ask questions. If any of the panelists would like to say anything more, any comments, thoughts, ideas, provocations, they can speak, or forever hold their peace. Or I mean, they can speak in another panel.
I was intrigued by the use of sound in a lot of the videos, because I found quite a substantial use of electronic sound. And it was intriguing to think about why is this happening? is there some sense that the kind of alienation or dystopic or unsettled or uneasy feeling that people wish to create in their work is best served by these electronic sounds? It's just, I mean, it just struck me as curious. I wonder if Amitesh would say something about, because he does it too. Babu doesn't. So it would be interesting to see why you don't. I mean, just thinking about sound.
Even when I was looking at Sheba's work, there was no sound, but it's it's like it says everything without the sound, and also the slow moving, the using the slow motion, and everybody is suddenly like very seriously looking at the what's happening there, looking at the camera. So sometimes I feel for my work, I feel that 50% visual is, uh, but usually I don't use it in the film. Like there is a lot of silence, very little sound, and very minimalistic kind of approach I do. But in this video, I made it because of that. I made a sound piece. So
Yeah,
most
you
of my
went the other way around.
yeah, like so then I started thinking that soundscape and then this visual things are but again the 10-minute sound I made it into 5. Again, it's reworked again. And also for me, I think this is like a 50% of the thing is visual, and another 50% is sound is creating some kind of a mood and the tempo of the thing. Where Amitesh work, when I saw it, like, that's in the beginning, you see the metropolis kind of shots, and I think it's a drone is coming from the bottom to the top, and then it shows, and then enter the office space and going very smoothly. It's a all a different kind of thing, but then there is a theater and the cinematic, everything is there. As Amitesh was mentioning about that camera, the kind of very documentary kind of thing. But I feel it is there, both kind of aspects are there. Same time cinematic and we are looking at through the camera, through the lens, and also those performing in front of the camera. It is something it's interesting with the theatrical, and also I was feeling that entering to that kind of space and then getting the fun from them and then using that space, and you are making some comment. It's quite amazing.
Thank you, Babu. That means a lot coming from you. Yeah, I think the opening sort of frame of the metropolis, this sort of hazy, polluted, not. I mean, you don't actually see a horizon. It's a horizonless visual of a metropolis. And as the drone comes down, the first actually thing that one sees in the film is the drone camera itself. It goes right close to the glass building, and there you see it sees its own reflection there. And even before you see a body, you see an object of surveillance, sort of the object that's conducting surveillance, that's conducting a survey in some sense of the times we live in. And I have to say that I was, the process of shoot was, I had Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot in mind while we were shooting, because and the fact that the whole campus is barren. You don't see any other employer, any other worker. And the end of the film is ruins again, almost as if the building has collapsed entirely, and what you see are just remains of this once the hubris of the capitalist structure that these two protagonists inhabited. And I think responding to the sound question that Sheba put, I have a very complicated relationship with sound. I think, like Babu, I do hear sound first, and then I go looking for the visual. And that's, I think, how how it develops. It's I don't think I can quite articulate how it happens or why I do it. But it's interesting that, Sheba, you say that that there is you see a ubiquitous use of electronic sound, which I don't think I ever stepped back to observe. I took it as a condition of our time, with machines buzzing around us all the time, that sound itself is nothing but an electronic production. And therefore, there is an inherent rejection that I have of melody, melodic sound, as well as ambient sound, as well as sound that the camera just happens to catch. And perhaps that's where the search for a third kind of sound comes in. I don't know. Maybe that's what's happening.
Yeah, I was curious, so thank you. For me, sound is so powerful, and also very often sound may come to me before images arise, that I use it with such repetition that I end up not using it at all. So, yes.
Even
I mean,
when we
Have
see,
a from Shibu this had that was the comment. I think we're I'm not sure if she's here. Anuj, Shia.
Yes, I'm here.
Can you hear me? Or is my
Yes, Sarover.
network?
There's some breakage in your speech.
Slag. I don't know why it's happening. And Chandrita is supposed to give the concluding remarks.
Yes,
I think we are sort of coming to the end of our time. And since there are no more questions, shall we wrap up?
Yep. I think, thank you, everybody. It was really lovely discussing this with you. And thank you, Anuj, and the festival for inviting me as a discussant and all of us here. And I hope we can continue creating heterotopias or destroying some, I don't know, let's see, in all the forms of work that we do. And so thank you for giving us this space and this forum.
Thank you, Sarover. Thank you, VAICA, Chandrita, Amitesh, Babu, Anuj, Bharti, everybody who's been involved. It was a nice discussion. I enjoyed the evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
thank you.
Babu, you're
And I
trying to
think,
say something?